Yo guys, I'm here for another Grand Archive deck guide, and this time I'll be showcasing a fun Silvie build. Before I discuss the build, I'll quickly explain Pride. This is a tamer mechanic where some allies require you to be a certain level before they will obey you. So Pride 2, like on this Grey Wolf, means you need to be level 2 before it would obey, similar to like Pokemon and gym badges. So there's been a slight functional change to obedience, which I think now makes Silvie playable, especially into the current meta boogeyman LORRAINE. Prior, if an ally didn't obey a player, they couldn't attack, intercept or retaliate. However, the change now means they can retaliate, which makes 100% sense. If I was to hit a beast, I'd expect the beast to hit back. So this change definitely has those Silvie players excited, and I might not call myself a Silvie main, but I definitely want to experiment with the tamer class. Here's the list with sideboard that I came up with, a link will be in the description below. Also, if you like the content, please consider subscribing and all that good stuff, really helps me out. Also, before I provide the breakdown and game plan for the deck, thought I'd explain why I chose Wind for my first tamer deck. So allies are able to retaliate now, but outside from sweeps or being Silvie level 3, good opponents can still pretty easily play around these units and might be able to kill them without using their champion. So when looking at the current card pool, I think Wind was the only element that can address these issues. First, you need a big unit like Tempest Silverback, which at a minimum is 6/6, making it really hard to clear with allies alone. And the other, you need to force exchanges. For that, we have Cry for Help. Now, a good player can sequence attacks to play around the big monkey, but Cry for Help says no to that and forces the bad exchanges. Now, if you can get a couple Cry for Helps off on a Silverback, you can push a lot of damage. And even if you can't, the threat of this should help you get to the late game, where Silvie excels, but has historically struggled at getting to. Okay, the game plan for this deck is pretty simple. Make our beasts bigger, protect those beasts like your life depends on it, force attacks into them, and then in the late game turn on Pride and swing with these roided up beasts. So the two beasts in the list are Tempest Silverback and the Grey Wolf. Now Silverback is the MVP of the deck, but the Wolf is good to force some early tempo as you can turn on its Pride much quicker than the Silverbacks. Also, using a Beastal Frenzy on the Wolf to cleave your opponent's board is a good early play into ally based list. Outside of that, you really want to look at making beasts bigger. A great play is to sequence your level 1 Silvie materialization with the Silverback, making it a 7/7. Windstream Mutt is another great card, as not only does it get a buff counter, you also get another unit on the board. Attune the Winds at face value is the best pump card as it applies to all allies, and then if you've played a Melody, you can draw a card. However, this card is hard to generate maximum value from and will take reps on judging when's best to play the card. From my own testing, I've held off playing this card as I wanted to also draw a card and lost units in the subsequent turn, so sequencing this card is really important. Finally, Young Beast Bonder. This is a card added from Altar, and it's everything you want in a tamer deck. It buffs and it's floating memory, enough said. Sometimes I use Windstream Mutt to buff the Beast Bonder as it puts your opponent in a difficult choice of trying not to give you floating memory or leaving 2 power on the board. Now, like any good pet owner, you need solid pet insurance, as if something happens to our furry friends, it could cost us dearly. For that, we have the following. Favorable Winds is +1 health and floating memory, pretty easy to grasp. Song of Nurturing is +2 health and an additional 1 power, which is the Chef's Kiss into a sweep by an overeager LORRAINE player. And finally, Reclaim. Now this is a last resort, as when you bounce something back to hand, it loses buff counters. However, look at this as getting a card back in hand and floating a memory into your graveyard. Now the problem I see players make is they play favorable Winds early, sometimes without units on the field just to get floating memory into the graveyard. While this may work in other decks, in this one it's not the way to go, as your win con is keeping your animals and beasts alive, not rushing to level 3. Now the whole point of this deck is to force bad exchanges and get your opponents to attack a Silverback and a pumped up Wolf rather than Silvie. This is done in the early game with Cry for Help, and then in the later game by Hymn of Gaia's Grace, which let's say is a buffed up Cry for Help. You get to scry, draw a card, put out an ally onto the field and switch the attack. This card does it all. The final taunt and the best one is Silvie level 3 static ability of giving all animals and beasts intercept and +1 health. If you can get to level 3 against a LORRAINE while developing a board, you should be in a good position to win the game. Now outside from leveling up, how do we turn on Pride? You have 2 methods. We have cards that give us a level for a turn, bit of a burst level, while we have other cards, mainly items, that give us an additional level while they're on the field. So usually you always will have Beastbound Ears out at level 3, so you'll usually always be level 4. You can alternate between which flute for depending on matchups, and then in the cases where you don't want the flute out because you've got the burst cards in hand, you can kind of use one per turn to like maintain that level 5 when you're attacking. However, if you're playing a more defensive game plan, you're going to kind of need all the items out, or at least 2 of them, one of the flutes plus base bonds, to be level 5 when you're level 3 Silvie, or all 3 of them if you're at level 2 Silvie. Okay, now that we've explained the game plan, let's discuss some key cards for the common matchups that we're currently seeing. So as at the time of this video, the top deck is any element iteration of LORRAINE, with all of them having the same endgame. Getting to level 3, making a really tall sword and attacking with it to draw additional cards, potentially swinging with it multiple times per turn to draw even more cards. Now this makes it easier for me to do a matchup guide for LORRAINE, as all the decks require us to have the same game plan against it. So Cry for Help is good to sneak in early damage by forcing the LORRAINE to attack it, but it is critical to keep one in hand for when they are level 3, as their big attack that draws cards is conditional on that they need to hit your champion. So use Cry for Help to negate the additional card draw and prevent a ton of damage. Another key card is Song of Nurturing, as this is to counter their sweeps and level 2 effect of drawing a card on kill. The highest that LORRAINE can sweep is 6, so Nurturing is pretty good at putting our Silverbacks out of kill range. Also in terms of turning stuff off, this is where the Lantern comes in, as the LORRAINEs use their Crux site to recycle other Crux cards. The Lantern will turn this off as the cards in their graveyard won't be Crux. This is also good into Fire LORRAINE, as it turns off the other big fire attacks like Rending Flames and Fiery Momentum. There is one fire attack to be worried about, which is Devastating Blow, as it can kill a Silverback without the ability to retaliate, so keep that in mind when up against the Fire LORRAINE. Okay, so the other common matchups are Luxem Xander and Arcane or Erupting Rhapsody Rye. In both of these matchups, you kind of need to rush. For that, it's pretty much where the whole sideboard comes in, but you also probably want to start playing Alan, Beast Vecna instead of Silvie, as Alan's ability allows you to get +2 levels. So Alan, couple beasts or animals out, and Beast Bond Ears, you're level 5 and you can turn on all your Silverbacks. The other key cards are Veiling Breeze and Safeguard Amulet. Both the Luxem Xander and Rye can kill by bypassing your animals and beasts and one-shotting you. This is where Veiling Breeze and Safeguard Amulet are so important, because they stop non-attack damage, which is the main source of damage that these 2 decks are going to be presenting. So yeah, ditch Silvie, bring in Alan, and make sure you've got some cards that can prevent non-attack damage. So yeah, the sideboard, as previously mentioned, is for your Xander and Rye matchups. It is essentially just to push aggro. You bring in Alan, you've got more beasts, you've got Fervent Beastmaster, which can just push even more damage and has vigor, which is great. So in these matchups against Rye and Xander, take out all the terror stuff, put in all the beasts, and just go face. Also take out Cry for Help, because they're just not as relevant into those matchups as they are into LORRAINE. Before I wrap up, I'll quickly just go over some of the pitfalls I've noticed when playing this deck. Some of the mistakes I've made are overextending and not keeping shields up, so just playing all my units out and then not being able to protect them. Not being aggressive enough into mages and assassins. You really need to kill them before they can kill you, and knowing when to level up. Silvie's level 1 and level 2 abilities, trying to maximize that requires setup, but then you also need to know when you kind of just need to level up and you don't want to extend the game too much, especially into those mages and assassins. So that's all for the video. As always, thanks for watching. Please consider subscribing and liking if you want more of this content, and if you have any questions or want to talk to me about Grand Archive, as always, reach out to me in the Discord. Cheers.